everyone, hope you're having a really good day. For today's project we are going to be working in this large A4 sized journal with some junk journaling supplies I collected from a recent coffee date. I have set myself the challenge today of just staying within the frame of one A4 sized page. I think that's realistic for the amount of ephemera I have, which really wasn't very much because all we did was go to Starbucks, but I have tried to maximize the way that we're going to use these items of ephemera. And also the other main thing I want to do today is create some really beautiful textures and some handmade ephemera to really elevate the page. And the key thing I want to communicate is that it doesn't have to be fancy to do that. You don't need fancy equipment. You don't need fancy supplies. You just need a little bit of creativity, and we're really going to give it our best shot in adding some quirky little handmade details to go on this very simple page. Some of the ephemera I'm working with today are some thrifted stickers and cardstock. I've also got some tissue paper here and some coordinating sellotape that's just got some little white dots printed on it. And then my ephemera from the day are just a regular paper bag. My order came in like a paper packet, a little review card, like where you can leave your feedback. From obviously you can see here I went to a Starbucks. And the good thing about this particular ephemera is that it goes together, like it's got coordinating colors, which is helpful. There were some gifts exchanged on the day, so I've got some wrapping paper here from the gift, and then I did photocopy my little order sticker. The thermal printing on receipts and things doesn't really last, so it's good to sort of photocopy what you can. Typically I'd also add like the receipt and some other things onto that photocopy page, but I forgot to get one on the day. And then we are just going to cut down that paper bag, mostly because it had some details on the back that I wanted, but also I sort of figured by this point that I might end up using that bag as a pocket, and so I really don't need the back of the bag to do that. I can just use the page as the back of the pocket. So I wanted to really get going, and the way to do that I've always feel like is breaking in the page with something large like a background. It sort of feels like, wow, the majority of the page is already covered and I haven't added anything in yet. But what it's also doing for me is coordinating some colors already. It's giving the page some dimension and some pattern. Moving on to the first piece of our handmade ephemera that we're going to be using today for our page is a little watercolor illustration. And I don't want either of those two words, watercolor or illustration, to intimidate you in the slightest. We're using watercolor pencils today. If you don't have watercolor pencils, use texters, crayons, pencils, whatever you've got that is going to help you to just bring in some of your own handmade marks to the page. I did draw this out with lead pencil first. You can't really see it, but basically I just used straight lines and curved lines, nothing fancy, to create a little replication of my order. So I ordered an orange and poppy seed muffin and a cup of coffee. And so I thought, seeing as the photograph had or has some nice orange tones, that it might be good. And also seeing as an orange and poppy seed muffin is not particularly visually very appealing. It just looks like when you draw it, it just looks like a kind of like a orangey white cake, like nothing particularly fancy. Again, nothing fancy. I thought it might be fun to include an actual image of an orange, just because it's going to bring out some of those orange tones from the photograph and add a little bit of charm to the illustration. And to draw an orange, really all you're doing is some triangles with curved tops enclosed in a circle. And you'll see as I put this illustration together that that's really all I'm working with, is straight lines and curved, slightly askew curved lines for most of what we're doing here. So again, I don't want you to feel intimidated. Just give it a go. So with the leaf, all we're doing is adding a kind of a squished over oval shape with a line in the middle. I'm not going to any great detail here because you will lose a lot of those details once we start to add water to the illustration anyway. And just using a very simple cross-hatching technique to add the pigment down onto the page. It's just filling in that outside gap. So if you can color in reasonably well, you can use watercolors and create a watercolor illustration. I'm certainly don't consider myself a watercolor painter. Actually, painting in general is something I don't feel super confident with, but by reiterating some of those same colors, so I'm using the same yellow that I used in the orange, the same yellow that I used in the leaf, to then bring about some of those same yellow tones to the cake. That's hopefully going to create a sense of continuity within your illustration. Likewise with the paper that I'm drawing here, I've added grey, but then I've gone back in very lightly with some of those same browns from the cake, because obviously the cake inside the paper in real life is the same. So it's going to have some of those same tones, but it's also going to help tie that illustration together. And one thing that's fabulous about these watercolor pencils as opposed to a watercolor palette, especially for a beginner like me, is that you can have so much control over what you're doing. It doesn't matter if you go outside the lines. That only, in my opinion, adds more charm to your painting. You can just splosh around and have fun, and it's kind of inconsequential because all of those little imperfections kind of disappear in the water, but also like just add more character and charm. And then the more white that you add in certain areas, so you'll see me go back many times with white just over the top of certain areas, it's going to add a level of creaminess to your paint and also kind of help lift up certain areas visually, just to sort of add dimension to like some areas being more opaque and some being less opaque. So if you have one packet of colored pencils for watercolor, that's going to be more than enough because you're just, in this case, repeating a lot of the same colors. We're just filling in here. I sort of figured that because, well, actually my coffee was in a takeaway cup like this rather than being in a ceramic cup. Obviously a ceramic cup would look more charming on the page, but it's also going to be roughly the same height as the muffins. So by being more true to life in this case and having a takeaway cup, it's going to add a little bit more height and dimension to what we're doing here. And also in drawing this coffee cup, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like your eye and your brain fill in the gaps. So it doesn't matter if it's not perfectly straight. It doesn't matter if it's not to scale. It doesn't even matter if it's the wrong shape. Your eye will look at most of these details and your brain will communicate that, oh yes, that's some sort of cake or some sort of snack, food item, and a drink item. Like it might not necessarily know straight away that it's an orange and poppy seed muffin with coffee, but it can tell you, and your brain will tell you like, oh yes, that's like some sort of like, food order. And that's something really to be exploited. Like, don't worry if your lines aren't straight. Don't worry if we're not looking at shadowing. We're not looking at any light sources, anything like that. If you can put down your darkest colors first, which is what I've done in every case here. The orange, I went in with the darkest orange first. The coffee cup went in with the darkest green first. Same with the leaf, dark first, and fill in with your lighter colors. You'll be able to create a sense of dimension without having to worry about any of that light source or anything like that. Just relax and have fun. It's as simple as that. Drawing and painting are skills that a lot of us in our day-to-day life don't use as much. We, tend to hold muscle memory for so many tasks and activities that we do in our day, like driving a car, cooking food, and drawing just doesn't get a look in. And I think that's why a lot of people are intimidated by picking up a pencil or, maybe having an idea that they can't draw. It's just because you haven't practiced it enough. I truly believe that everybody can draw, that it's just something that muscle memory wise, you don't flex that muscle enough. And so therefore, maybe it's a skill that feels underutilized. So I encourage you to use your journal as a place to explore that, and don't worry about it not being perfect. Just use it as a way to start communicating from yourself to your viewer, even if that viewer is you, and you will start to develop those skills over time. I promise. Don't let it be scary. Just start out with some colored squares and some colored circles, and keep developing and working on those until you feel comfortable, and then move on to some slightly larger or different basic shapes, which is all I've used today to put this illustration together, is just variations on lines, circles, squares, basic shapes. And then you will eventually, over time, you will grow and flex that muscle. I promise. Okay, moving on to your water here. This is a great little tool to have. It's just like a little squeezy paintbrush, and it's got water inside, but you don't need to squeeze it as you paint with it. The water just disperses beautifully and evenly out of the tip of the pen, and it was not expensive. I think I paid about $6 for it about 10 years ago. Like, I've had it forever and it's just kept going. And so a great investment. And you can see to the right, I've just got a little chucks on a dish, and that's just serving as a way for me to just clean up the tip of my brush in between each color. That is something I would recommend, just so you don't get too much bleeding. Something I would also recommend is if you've got quite a heavy-handed color like I've got here in the green, and you're not using watercolor paper, which I'm not here. This is not watercolor paper, which is risky. You can see in the top right-hand corner, it's already started to warp a little bit. So very risky, but if you just let it dry down, certain colors dry down in between each application of water, you won't get as much crinkling. And then once it's all dry, you can just let it rest under some heavy books and it'll flatten out really nicely. So I did actually make a nice little palette on the side of my page with all the colors and testers that I've used to make the painting today. I find this is always a really beautiful way of adding some extra mark making to the page. So I am adding some water to these, even though they were just testers, and then hopefully down the track as something I can add back into my page somewhere. So now that that green has dried down a little bit on my illustration, I can go back in and start adding the brown. And again, it's just gently letting that water disperse over the pigment you've laid down on the page. And the watercolor pencils can sometimes leave like a scratchy look. So you might just need to go back again and add a little bit more water if you're finding any of that scratching occurring where you can still sort of see your pencil strokes. It should work away pretty easily, but sometimes they can hang around. So I don't want you to be too concerned about that. And also likewise, I don't want you to be too concerned about going out the lines, because this is a watercolor painting. It's supposed to be kind of a little bit whimsical and kind of almost has haste to it when you look at it. And that's what I love about it, like just letting it sort of exist, not worrying too much about perfection and details. Like, don't worry about going outside the lines. Don't worry about things being perfect. Just splosh some paint around and have fun. So you can see here that where I've added white to some of those exact same, so this plate here was using the same colors that I used in the muffin, but by adding white, it has given it a slightly different look on the page, but they still feel like they're communicating with each other because they're put together with the same pigments. Right, now we're using some of the brown tissue paper to fill in the rest of that blank white page in the bottom half. Most of this will be covered up, but it's nice to just feel like there's something there to fill in that white gap. And start working on actually putting together the rest of our page, I like to scrunch up my tissue paper before laying it down. Even though obviously it does get smoothed out, it does give it that little bit of extra texture and dimension by scrunching it up and adding some more of those little wrinkles into the page. And I'm just laying glue down, making sure everything's all nice and there's no air bubbles, and finishing off the edge. So now we come to the second piece of handmade ephemera that I want for the page, and that is some sewing. I'm so excited, pun intended, to include some sewing into this journal page, because on the day we did do some fiber arts, so it just felt natural that there be some sort of fiber on the page. I'm going to be communicating that with this really nice piece of handmade paper, which kind of has a very soft quality to it. It's beautiful, and it was actually very difficult to tear it because it's so thick and luscious. But also we're going to be adding some sewing, which is a really nice way of lifting everything up. Now, we did do some fiber arts on the day, and those little pom-poms are what I was making. And so I'm starting out by working out some guide holes for my sewing. I used a lead pencil to just draw out and divot into the photograph where I want that sewing to go. Now, this is a photograph and it's quite heavy stock, printed stock, like a photograph. If you're using something much thinner, like just regular paper or copy paper, you will definitely need to reinforce that somehow. And the best way I recommend to do that is with some masking tape, just to give your needles and your threads something to sew onto without tearing your paper. That's really important, a really important step. I didn't need to do that today because the two pieces of paper I'm working on are quite heavy stock, so that definitely will be enough to hold the cotton without tearing it. But keep that in mind, that whatever you're sewing onto will need to be thick enough to hold the sewing, whatever it may be. So I'm just on a ratty piece of cardboard now, using that and my little craft knife to create some divots. You can just use your actual needle for this if you don't have a craft knife. Just be careful. And then where you've made those guide holes, you can now start sewing into them. And because I'm using cotton today, I'm able to just tie a small knot and start sewing as you normally would. If you're using yarn or embroidery floss or something a bit thicker, I recommend not tying a knot. It's just going to create a little lump behind your page if the fiber you're working with is too thick. So come in on the side and just use a little bit of sticky tape to hold down your end of your material that you're sewing with, rather than tying a knot if you're using something thicker. On this handmade paper, I did not need to puncture guide holes because it was actually more akin to fabric than paper, if I'm honest. So drawing out some little marks with my pencil and following those was enough, and I could just sew into it like I would sew into a piece of fabric. And the pom-poms actually worked as something really cute to add. Just bear in mind that, as you can see where I'm coming in on the center of each of those pom-poms, I'm working back into the same area over and over. If you're using a thread that's quite thick, again, you're going to have an issue where working back into the same area is going to make that area very thick, and it's also going to create the hole that you're sewing in is going to make that hole very large. So for me, I didn't have that problem because it's cotton, it's very thin, but just bear all of those in mind, and it might be worth having a little practice on something before you sew into whatever it is you're going to put into your journal. And just to finish off that sewing there, you can see that I added some sticky tape over all of the ends and over the backing just to make sure everything stays nice and tucked in. Now, when we're adding our pocket here, we're adding some glue to what are essentially the hinges of our pocket and the bottom flap, which I just created by folding the bottom of the bag up. I then realized that the pocket itself was going to actually be quite large if I made it the entire size of the paper bag. So just sort of creating a little section there just to make that pocket feel like more of an appropriate size. I didn't really know what size ephemera I would possibly need to fill a pocket of that, so like that large pocket. So then I decided to add some sewing to the pocket just to sort of reaffirm the colors that I used to sew those pom-poms and sort of create yet some more continuity within the page, and also some more texture as well. And so the way that I'm doing that is just to add some, again, same as we did with our other sewing, some guide holes. I did do these at 1/2 centimeter apart, and then just using a running stitch, tying off my thread and using a running stitch and going back and forth up the page. Now, one thing I did do here was using our sticky tape method to hold everything in place, keeping that going as I went along, because I'm sort of flippy flapping the page back and forth over and over. You're potentially going to lose tension and your threads might sag a little bit. So it's kind of a good idea to just keep adding sticky tape along that sewn line as you go. That will sort of help keep everything tucked in and tidy, but also most importantly, keeping your attention in your cotton or your string or whatever it is that you're using to sew along. So you can see all that sticky tape I've sort of added along the way there. I also ran out of string, cotton halfway, so I had to tie off and rethread my needle. And then obviously, because I can't be stopped, I had to continue that sewing up the other side of the pocket. I also felt that would help create more of a sense of an edge on the page too, like sort of finish everything off just nicely. And to be honest, like, you don't need a sewing machine to add sewing to your page. Like, it took no more time for me to do this than it would have been to thread my sewing machine up with green thread and sew the pocket in on this page. So, you know, when you see people using sewing on their page, I don't want you to think that if you don't have a sewing machine that that's out of reach for you. A needle and thread will work just fine in adding some more detail and texture to pockets, page edges, adding details to your photographs. If you're using photographs, if you're using magazine paper or something, just add some sticky tape behind whatever it is you want to sew. Grab a needle and thread and just go for it. Just have fun, because that will definitely add something very different and very quirky and fun to your page. I mean, it so happens that mine were pom-poms and they are made of fiber, but it doesn't need to make sense. You can use sewing to add details to any number of your ephemera pieces, and it will just be so beautiful. Then also using the ephemera that you collected on the day, elevating it by picking out the parts of it that are the most interesting to the eye. So the little feedback card, I sort of felt was it's all the right things. It's got a little cup of coffee, it's the right color, it's something different, it adds more detail, but it also felt a little bit commercial, I guess, which, you know, I guess is going to happen when you're at Starbucks. But by toning it down and picking out which parts of it to use, so the most interesting or the most appropriate for your page. So for me, that's the coffee cups, and a bit of that green, and also down the bottom, which is out of frame at the moment, I'm sorry, is a little like handwritten Kumara, you know, where we went. So it's like, leave your feedback for this store, and it says Kumara. So I wanted that to sort of be showing, but I just sort of thought the your Starbucks say part is kind of a little bit commercial. So left that part in, but then used up that little scrappy of wrapping paper and some of the details from the paper bag to sort of cover up the bits that I didn't really want to be seen. I also realized I'd forgotten to factor in my little photocopied order sticker, or piece of paper, so I started to figure out how to work that back into the page, and then just sort of settled on actually just gently removing some of the details I'd already laid down so that I could factor that into the side of the page down there in this little cluster of collage down the bottom here. So now just adding in some washi tape, some of those washi tapes, and some of these thrifted stickers for the date. I did want to tone down, they were bright gold. I did want to tone them down a little bit by adding some other tape over the top of them. If you don't have stickers, don't worry about it. Just use a pen or cut out some letters from a magazine, like some numbers out of a magazine, like page numbers on the bottom of pages. A great way to add dates because they've sort of got complete dates on complete numbers on them. And then just using a corner rounder to finish off this little illustration here. You don't need to use this, obviously. Just grab some scissors and finish off your corners. And I decided to use a little swatch that we did, a little swatch card as the journal card for this page, and then sort of felt like seeing as it's something that would be lifted in and out of the journal, that it needed something on the back to sort of finish it off. And so while that's drying, I did pop that under some heavy books, as I did with this illustration. Actually, once it was dry, just to sort of flatten it out, I did pop it under some heavy books for about an hour, and that sort of worked out some of those wrinkles that had sort of developed from the water, seeing as this isn't watercolor paper. And then going back in with my fine liner, again, just adding details. You can see I sort of made a bit of a bingle on the lid there that wasn't quite straight. Does it matter? Not in the slightest. As I said earlier, your brain fills in those details. It just becomes like a fun little detail, little maker's mark. And I couldn't be happier actually with how fantastic that mistake looks on the page. So don't stress about things not being perfect. This is a journal. It's not supposed to be something that you stress about. It's supposed to be something that is reflecting a fun time that you had, not driving you into perfectionism, which is something I'm definitely trying to be more chilled and calm about in my older years. I have a perfectionist trait and in my personality, and so these days I'm trying to be a bit more carefree and just let those mistakes just wash over and become part of something fabulous that happened on the day, which was I got to sit down at my desk and have fun and do some journaling about an experience that ended up being one of the highlights of my week, even though it was just a very simple coffee with friends. The other thing I want to communicate today, along with our supplies not being super fancy, is that you don't need to be going to lots of super fancy places, or, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't travel every week or every month. But those types of experiences are not necessarily the only ones we exclusively need to journal about. I think we have highlight experiences of our lives that obviously do feel exciting to journal about because they're places we've never been before, or maybe they're significant events in our lives like birthdays, weddings, etc. And sometimes these things can sort of fall few and far between. And so if we only keep our journaling to those things, sometimes it can kind of feel a bit like, well, what do I journal about now? And finding art and ways to communicate the simple things in life are, to me, some of the most wonderful challenges about junk journaling. Like, how do you take something as simple as a paper bag and make it into a fabulous pocket where you can then hold a journal card to hold some thoughts and reflection from your day. And maybe your day was nothing more than going to work and coming home and relaxing, but maybe you saw something fun on the way home. Maybe you stopped in and grabbed a cup of tea on your way back, or went to the shop and saw a cute dog or someone in a funny hat. These are all things that have created some character in your day, or something that differentiates today from yesterday and tomorrow. And so I've called this episode "It Doesn't Have to Be Fancy" for a number of reasons, because one, your experiences don't have to be fancy to justify journaling about them. Two, if you are junk journaling, Your materials don't have to be fancy. And 3, your skills don't have to be fancy in order to elevate and bring some handmade charm to your page. I hope you've enjoyed journaling with me today, and I hope the rest of your day is wonderful. I want to wish you a happy crafting. Bye-bye.